It's good to be with you guys. I hope everything is going well. I hope all the things we've been trying to send out have been beneficial and helpful for you. I hope the daily devotionals, the daily playlists, and everything we've been trying to do is basically just been a catalyst for you to draw closer to Jesus in this season. So, I make this promise all the time, and I'm always wrong, but I actually think we have a chapter today that I can do quickly. Mainly because Matthew chapter 23 is really singular in terms of what it's addressing. It's basically a pronouncement of judgment on Israel or Jerusalem specifically, and the Pharisees and the scribes more specifically. The idea there is that Jerusalem is the hub of Israel's religion. So everything is this is a very this is a very geographical religion based on a specific location, a specific temple, all those things. And so Jesus, we've talked about this not only in my sermon, but throughout some of our different videos and other things, that one of the more common themes in Matthew is that Jesus pronounces judgment first on the house of Israel, and specifically those who are leaders, those who should have been leading people to faith, those who should have been a blessing to the people they lead, and instead have been a curse, and instead have brought a curse upon themselves and upon the nation. So that's the big idea. That's basically the idea. This is the concept we see over and over again in Matthew chapter 23 in a nutshell. The Matthew 23 primarily is a pronunciation of judgment, specifically against the religious leaders of Jesus' time, and specifically because of hypocrisy. So I'm going to kind of walk through this stuff pretty quickly, guys. To sum up for today, I encourage you to read it on your own. Before we do this, one of the things that I mentioned this in my devotional as well today is that when we hear about the scribes or the Pharisees or the Sadducees, our tendency now is to look at them and go, those guys were so awful. I would never be I would never be like them. There's a problem with that, which is when we think like that, we are absolutely thinking just like the scribes and the Pharisees. So the moment we think we have this, I'm too good for that kind of attitude, we've already drifted into the kind of thinking that the scribes, the Pharisees, the religious elite in Jesus' day had. They thought they were better than everyone. They thought they knew better than everyone. They thought that they were the pure and everyone else was the unclean, that were simply going to contaminate them. And so when we read through this story, it's really important that we don't miss the fact that in a lot of ways, especially nowadays, 2,000 years separated from the cross, in a lot of ways, Christians would be the modern day Pharisees in a lot of sense. Not all Christians, obviously, but we all fall in. It's way easier for us now to fall into that tendency of thinking, I would never be like that person or these types of people. I'm better than that. And so we don't want to miss the fact that when we hear this pronunciation of judgment against them, that what are the things that we see mentioned in here that we can relate to, that we struggle with. There's hope in this, and we'll get to that towards the end, but we don't want to gloss over this or think so highly of ourselves that we think that we're immune to these kinds of problems. Okay, so that said, let's kind of jump into it. It begins with the line in verse 23, Jesus said to the crowds and to his disciples, the scribes and the Pharisees sit on Moses' seat. So do and observe whatever they tell you, but not the works they do. For they preach, but do not practice. Okay, this sums up the idea in a lot of ways. One, by saying that the scribes and the Pharisees sit on Moses' seat. Who was Moses? Moses was a leader. He was a person of authority in Israel. Specifically, if you don't know who Moses was, Moses led the children of Israel out of Egyptian slavery. And he was the first leader. He was the person that they looked to in all these things. And so the Pharisees and the scribes are similar in that they have a position of authority and they have influence. And Jesus says, look, beware of those guys, because essentially they might give you good advice, but they don't practice it. They don't practice what they preach. This is literally how Jesus says it. Then he unpacks the different ways in which they don't practice what they preach. So, verse 4, they tie up heavy burdens hard to bear and lay them on people's shoulders, but they themselves are not willing to move them with their finger. So they're not willing to lift a finger, but they're quick to put responsibilities and burdens on others. They make their phylacteries broad and their fringes long, and they love the place of honor at feasts and the best seats in the synagogues and greetings in the marketplaces and being called rabbi by others. That means they love to be acknowledged for their goodness. They love the praise of men, essentially. And this isn't like an uncommon thing. We all, in a lot of ways, love the praise of men. I'll be 100% honest there. There's a part of me that when someone calls me a pastor, like this little thing wells up inside of me, and it's like, oh, they think I'm this special guy because I'm a pastor and stuff. Well, we all likes to some extent the praises of men. This is not to say that it's not to do either of things. One, it's not to say that it's okay to do this, and it's also not to excuse it. It's to acknowledge it, we should say. So every one of us should be aware of that idea. There's a danger, especially when you think you're doing the right thing and you're being recognized to it or recognized for it. There's a real tendency to, get a big head in that and start going, that's the goal. The goal is to be acknowledged for being pious and religious and righteous before people. And the truth is no, it's not. What the goal is to honor God, and the goal is ultimately to be accepted and honored by Him. See, that's the idea. We want to hear God say to us one day, "My good and faithful servant, well done." It really doesn't matter that much if the people around you are willing to say that as well. If you know what you're doing is right, and if what you're doing right is right, what I mean by that is if it falls in line with what God teaches. God defines righteousness. He defines the way we should live. Okay, I'm already started getting dangerous on running too long, so I'm going to keep going here. Okay, so Jesus unpacks this idea, and he talks about these different things. Basically, he says, verse 11 kind of sums it up. The greatest among you shall be your servant. Whoever exalts himself will be humbled. Whoever humbles himself will be exalted. The Christian's our goal should always be to seek humility. Paul puts it another way of living a quiet life. The goal is not to draw attention to ourselves. The goal should always be to draw attention to our God, to Jesus. And we do this not by showing off, but rather by humbly doing what is right, but through humble obedience. And he continues to go on, "What are you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites? You shut the kingdom of heaven in people's faces, for you neither enter yourselves nor allow those who would to go in." So, not only are they themselves keeping them from the kingdom of God, but also they're keeping others from it. Because they impose burdens, they try to hold people back from the truth. They are a problem. They're a hindrance rather than a help. And so we always want to make sure that we are people who are leading people closer to God, not giving them more reasons to stay away from God. Okay? He continues to go, "Woe to you, blind guides, who say, if anyone swears by the temple is nothing. If anyone swears by the golden temple, he is bound by his oath." And so he gets to this idea that essentially they love to look at the details and try to exploit certain details. So it would be one thing to say, well, if you swear by this, it's nothing. Don't even worry about it. No big deal. You're cool. However, if you swear by the temple, no biggie. Swear by the golden temple, that's a big issue. And he's like, you're making the wrong distinctions here. What you're not acknowledging is the fact is basically you're trying to create reasons, loopholes for yourself. And Jesus is horribly against that. He's like, no. Stick to the rules. Stick to humble obedience. Verse 23 talks about the idea, "What are you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites?" He keeps saying that. "You tithe mint and dill and cumin and have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faithfulness. These you ought to have done without neglecting the others." So the idea there is that they're more concerned with these things that are we've talked about this before, outwardly religious. So they tithe their spice rack, essentially. They do all that. But when it comes to the way they treat others, when it comes to the way they forgive others, those are things that they lack. This is true of us as well. Like I said, once we start making the approval of others the thing that we're seeking, it doesn't take long to figure out that you can get the approval of others without a lot of heart change. You can put on a good show. And so Jesus calls people out for that. He's like, you're just putting on a good show, but your hearts are far from me, essentially. So he goes on, he continues with all this. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, your whitewashed tombs and all those things. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees. You build the tombs of the prophets, but you're also the type of people you're the ones who murdered, the sons of those who murdered the prophets. He goes on to say about all this, and then he says, in verse 37, he kind of ends this statement with, O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stone those who are sent to it. How often I would have gathered your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you are not willing. See, your house is left to you desolate. For I tell you, you will not see me again until you say, Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Okay, so this is this pronunciation of judgment. He's saying, basically, your house is desolate. There's nothing. God is removing himself from their midst, essentially. And we'll go into this a lot more tomorrow when we talk about the Olivet Discourse in Matthew chapter 24. But this is basically what Jesus says. It's keeping with Matthew's theme that he's already thrown out there. Now Jesus kind of goes on about it more and talks about the fact that basically these people were outwardly religious, they were hypocrites, but their hearts were far from God. And so they would do things that seemed impressive to some, but in terms of the bigger things, the things God more cares about, they didn't listen to. Now, he says, like I said, he says your house is left to you desolate, meaning it's broken, it's useless and such. But then in verse 39, we read, for I tell you, you will not see me again until you say, Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Now, this is interesting because when we just got over talking about Jesus entering Jerusalem, this is what people were saying when Jesus was entering Jerusalem. They were saying, Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. But then there's the scribes and the Pharisees who sit on the sidelines and go, God or Jesus, stop that. Stop them from saying that. That's blasphemous. They shouldn't say that. And what Jesus is essentially saying, the road back comes from joining those people. It's in acknowledging that Jesus is the Christ that we are restored, as opposed to we won't be able to rebuild the house on our own. This is an idea that was true then, and it's also true of us now. Guys, the honest truth is that we can't rebuild our own lives. We can't work our way back to God. We can't make things right on our own. But it's through acknowledging Jesus and who he is that we are made right and we are restored. And so that's the big idea I have for you guys for Matthew chapter 23 today. I'm going to go to work on my Good Friday sermon as well as tomorrow's thoughts on Matthew 24. Please keep me in the prayers. Really appreciate it, guys. Feeling a lot better now. And just keep praying for each other. Keep loving your neighbors. Keep in touch. We get through this together. All right. God bless, guys. Take care.